Just a little housekeeping before we start the conclusion of our tale on Charles Cheetah Ng and Leonard Thomas Lake. Almost Fiction now has an Instagram account where I have already started posting daily true crime shorts. Every day I will be posting a new tale, a new story, all in perfect little bite-sized pieces that you can listen to wherever you are. Got 2 minutes you need to kill? Need a distraction on your phone in order to ignore an old coworker you just made eye contact with? Need something to watch while you hide in the bathroom from your kids or overly clingy pet? I got you. So head on over and follow Almost Fiction at Almost Fiction Pod. That's at Almost Fiction Pod over on Instagram. Now with that out of the way, let's get back to the conclusion of our latest case. Last time on Almost Fiction, we followed Charlie Ng as his carefully constructed world began to crumble around him. After a simple shoplifting attempt gone wrong at South City Lumber Store, Leonard Lake was arrested when police discovered an illegal weapon and false identification in his vehicle. Rather than face imprisonment, Leonard chose to take his own life using a cyanide pill hidden in his shirt collar, leaving Charlie to face the consequences all on his own. As the walls closed in, Charlie fled to Chicago before making his way to Canada, where he believed he'd be safe from extradition due to their policies regarding the death penalty. Meanwhile, investigators began piecing together the horror at Leonard's cabin. They discovered bullet holes, bloodstains, and a series of shallow graves containing the remains of their victims. The bunker they discovered then revealed an even darker truth, a hidden cell designed to hold prisoners, complete with a one-way mirror for observation. Then, while shoplifting during Calgary's famous Stampede celebration, Charlie was confronted by 2 middle-aged cowboys working security at Hudson's Bay department store. The confrontation turned violent when Charlie pulled a gun, leading to a struggle that ended with both security guards injured, but Charlie finally in custody. In prison, Charlie found himself next door to Maurice Lowe-Laberge, a career criminal with his own colorful history who saw Charlie as his possible ticket to freedom. Welcome back to part 4 of our tale of Charles Cheetah Ng and Leonard Thomas Lake. Welcome back to Almost Fiction. April 1986. Moe was proving to be a worthwhile friend. He helped Charlie, answered his questions, gave him good advice that he used to become more comfortable in prison. Meanwhile, Moe was doing all he could to get his neighbor to talk, knowing that the more information he had, the more leverage he had. He saved those notes they passed, well, the ones that might be useful, and he would routinely send them to his lawyer on the outside for safekeeping. Burt Barker was a law professor as well as Moe's legal counsel. He was considered paranoid by those who knew him, a bleeding heart who believed in almost every conspiracy theory that he heard. He also knew about Charlie's case, well, everyone did, and maybe he could help his client get the deal that he was angling for. At the very least, Moe knew that even if he didn't get a deal, he'd at least try and get enough info out of Charlie to maybe write a book and make some money that way. Moe continued to pass notes, continued to get more friendly with Charlie, and soon the two were joking around with each other, ribbing each other, and sharing secrets. They even were permitted to begin to exercise in the yard together, where they would spend time talking face to face while they worked out. As April turned to May, Charlie began to open up more, speaking freely about all the charges he was facing back in the States. He even told Moe about Leonard murdering his own brother and then his best man, both of which happened when Charlie was in jail, so it was impossible for him to be tied to those. Finally, Charlie spoke about some of the murders he'd participated in, bragging about them and how easy it was for him. But it was just a lot, even to the point that Moe thought he was over-exaggerating. Charlie claimed to have cut the reproductive organs off his victims, including cutting off one of the victim's testicles with a chainsaw. He then talked about pouring acid on living victims before stating, quote, "The crimes I committed aren't even in the books, and they won't be because the people I killed aren't around to talk about it," end quote. He then told Moe how he had disposed of the bodies and evidence, well, how they had started in the beginning before they got lazy and just buried them. Next, he talked about burning some of the bodies, stating, quote, "It smells like pig on a spit when they are burning. If you're hungry, it makes your mouth water. Later, you come back and smash the pieces with a spade. When it has cooled, like charcoal, you pick up the pieces of bone that you can see and put them in a pail. Then you spread it in the knee-high grass. It's like sprinkling pepper on steak," end quote. June 1986. Charlie finally began to open up about the Dubs family murders. They had found a classified ad, and wanting the equipment for themselves, him and Leonard had answered the ad, and after taking care of the family, they had taken everything that they wanted. Charlie also spoke about how Leonard often praised him for his kills, praise the man had been starving for his entire life. Quote, Lake would tell me what to do and I'd do it. Sometimes I knew what he was going to say, so I did it before he told me. End quote. But when it came time to talk about the murder of the Dubs' baby, Charlie finally balked. For the first time, he almost showed signs of regret when he said, quote, Lake told me it would be a good training experience, like in the SS when they were given a puppy at the beginning of their training and forced to kill it to graduate. The baby was a little hard, but the mother was a piece of cake. I don't think they found the spot where we buried them, or there would be something in the paper or the news. End quote. Later, he would also say, quote, At first I felt funny about wasting the baby. Then I figured it was better that way than having no parents. End quote. Moe was worried. Sure, he could testify of what Charlie had told him, but it was still all just hearsay. Charlie could lie and say he hadn't said any of that, and Charlie always seemed careful not to talk about too many details that might corroborate the confessions. Moe tried to get Charlie to write down the details in notes that they passed back and forth, but it was slow going. Charlie said he had killed 12 people in total, 8 men, 2 women, and 2 children. Moe just kept listening as Charlie talked. Then finally, Charlie said something Moe might be able to use. When asking Charlie how his victims acted when they found out they were going to be killed, Charlie told him, quote, One of the bitches offered to be Lake's and my slave. Forever. End quote. When asked if that was on one of the videos that was discovered, Charlie said yes before almost immediately trying to backtrack. Later, Moe was able to wrestle out another piece of verifiable information when Charlie admitted that when they had burned one of their victims' bodies, Charlie's coworker, Cliff Parenteau's, they had forgotten to take his handcuffs off first, and they were likely still in one of the burn pits, which they were. He also stated he had kept an engraved pen and pencil set with Cliff's name on them, a pen and pencil set that were removed from Charlie's apartment. Charlie even admitted to shooting Paul Cosner in the head when the pair had met him so that they could steal his copper Honda Prelude. Quote, I shot him in the head. Bang. Right behind the ear. He made a strange gurgling sound in his throat, a real deep rattle noise. End quote. Charlie continued to talk to Moe as time went by, talking about other crimes and even drawing little cartoons about them before sending them over to Moe's cell. They were graphic to say the least, and while some of them were supposed crime scenes, others were definitely not based on anything real, at least Moe hoped not. Drawings of people having sex in every way imaginable, and some of the drawings even involved children and animals as well. They turned Moe's stomach, and as he mailed the last batch of drawings to his lawyer for safekeeping, he wondered if he could even continue, but he had to. By August, Moe was just about done with Charlie. He couldn't take the constant presence anymore. Charlie just wouldn't give him a moment of rest. He was constantly bugging him, asking him questions, talking to him about horrible things, and Moe was just done. He first denied Charlie the use of his razor, a nice one that was not prison issue, and when Charlie was denied the favor, he flipped out. A week later, Charlie lost it again when Moe refused to help Charlie with a course assignment he was working on for school, refusing to do the work for Charlie. Charlie was livid and yelling, threatening Moe, who simply told the man to never threaten him again or else they would have a real problem. And Charlie's anger at Moe was okay now, as Moe no longer worried about keeping Charlie happy because he now felt he had enough to finally work a deal. He had already cast his line out by sending a letter to a homicide detective in San Francisco, one that stated that Moe had information, and to prove it, he even included one of the drawings Charlie had made, a sketch of Charlie murdering everyone he knew was assigned to his case back in California. Now all Moe LaBerge had to do was hope and wait. In the meantime, Charlie had actually been transferred to another prison, and Moe was grateful, and so was Charlie because for the first time he got to spend time in general population and not solitary confinement. He played nice, made friends, and even helped edit the prison newspaper titled Off the Wall. Meanwhile, the wheels of justice continued to grind stateside, though slowly. August 11th, 1986. Moe's letter arrives at the San Francisco Homicide Squad. Detective Ed Erdelatz was the one who read the letter, and immediately he called the enclosed number, a number that got him the prison where Moe was being held. He asked a few questions to the jailer there, asked if Moe had access to Charlie Ng, and was informed that yes, he did. They had neighboring cells to each other, and they exercised with each other daily for a few months at least. Eventually, the detective would learn that Moe had something like 400 of Charlie's little drawings, as well as more info on the murders he was accused of committing. Burke Barker then informed Detective Erdlatz that Moe would be completely willing to cooperate with their investigation, well, if they helped him out first. The detective said he'd find out about that and he'd call him back. Thus began a spat between Burke Barker and Detective Erdlatz that would last for a while, while they argued and even threatened each other about payment for evidence, favors, and deals with Canadian authorities. Meanwhile, California was still trying to get Charlie extradited to the States to stand trial, but the Canadian government was still balking. They wanted assurances. They wanted to know that Charlie was actually guilty before sending him off to the States. So, in order to find out more, they sent Ray Monroe to California so he could see what kind of evidence the Americans were really dealing with. Ray Monroe was a detective who grew up with next to nothing. He never knew who his father was and didn't really care, not wasting much thought on the man who had left his mother, 2 older sisters, and his little brother. In 1948, Ray was living with his mother, though his other siblings had been sent off to live with other family members because his mother could only afford to take care of one child, barely. He spent a lot of time alone growing up, often forced to take care of himself even as a young child, something that would actually help him when he joined the Air Cadets at 14 years old. His maturity was evident and he quickly rose up the ranks to sergeant. He liked the Air Cadets and was planning on joining the military as soon as he was old enough, but the RCMP, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police, came calling. He officially joined the Mounties when he was 19. After passing basic training, he would then go on to graduate at the top of his class. His first post was in Faust, Alberta in September of 1969, a small town of about 1,000 people. There were 4 officers total at his outpost, and they were responsible for a large area, and because of that, they were on call 24/7, 365. And because there was no local prosecutors or even judges, the Mounties often were called in to fill that role as well. Ray was great at his job. He was smart, punctual, and fair. Soon he had risen through the ranks and became a detective for the RCMP, where he became somewhat of a local legend for his ability to get perps to talk. He was never mean or threatening, he just had a way with people and was able to get them to trust him, something that would follow him throughout his life. He genuinely liked people and reserved his judgments of them. He was just a good cop. He met with detectives and reviewed their case, and he felt that they had plenty of evidence to convict Leonard Lake, had he not have killed himself, but the evidence against Charlie was a little less convincing. 10 days after leaving for the US, investigator Monroe was back in Canada making his report to his superiors. He told them what they had, and more importantly to him, what they were lacking. He, like the detectives working the case, had hoped there would be enough evidence not to have to rely on Moe LaBerge, but it looked like that might not be the case. The investigation continued for over a year. Charlie did not waste his time in prison and almost immediately began to plan an escape. He tried to enlist others in his plans, and though people listened, they usually just brushed Charlie off as a talker and not very serious. Finally, in November of 1987, California officials officially began paperwork for the extradition of Charles Cheetah Ng. That paperwork triggered an assignment for Detective Monroe, who flew to where Charlie was being held in Prince Albert in order to escort him to where he would be held while the extradition process played out. He also read the warrant that had been issued for Charlie to him. There were 25 offenses in total, mostly stemming from the kidnapping and murders of 13 individuals. He was also accused of being an accessory in the murder of Paul Cosner, for the attempted murder of Richard Carrazza, and of stealing from the Dubs' home. Charlie was then transported to the Edmonton Institution, where he was booked into a new cell. He was then given a court date for May 24, 1988. The hearing would be on whether or not he was going to be extradited to California, and both the Canadian government as well as the American government would state their case as to what they wanted. And no matter how he looked at it, it appeared as if in order for Charlie Ng to be tried in an American court for the murders he had committed, the testimony of Moe LaBerge would be required. There just really wasn't enough evidence. So, Detective Monroe traveled to the prison where Moe was being held, and expecting a back and forth, he was surprised when Moe almost instantly agreed to help. Turns out he had a parole hearing coming up, and hopefully his open cooperation with law enforcement would be just the thing he needed to get on the board's good side. Moe was in. Spring 1988. With the extradition hearing rapidly approaching, news of an assassination attempt rocked everyone involved in the case. A 41-year-old police informant had recently been arrested for a DUI, and in order to try and get out of it, he told police that a Charlie Ng, someone he had recently served time with, had agreed to pay him if he would just kill a few people. Officers initially thought the man was lying, but he said he had proof that was still inside his now impounded Pontiac Ventura, the same one he was driving when he was arrested. In the car, police found a handwritten list of witnesses and prosecutors in the case against Charlie, complete with addresses and even phone numbers. There were also asterisks beside some of the listed names. They were the ones who needed to go first. Quote, "He wanted me to follow them home from the courthouse. He said it was not a busy courthouse and they would never think they were being followed. He wanted them both killed." End quote. There were almost 20 people on the list, people who Charlie thought could hurt him in his hearing. More came out about Charlie at the same time, top of the list being how he'd also been overheard telling people of his plans to kill a prison guard in order to get life in Canada, and so he wouldn't be extradited to face the death penalty in the United States. Investigators tried to get Charlie to confess to the hits as they believed that their informant's testimony wouldn't hold up in court due to his sordid past. They wrote to Charlie pretending to be the informant, but Charlie would only reply in code, statements that couldn't be used in court. Then, in a confusing bit of Canadian prison system transfers, Moe LeBers would once again find himself housed in the same prison as Charlie, and he was less than happy to see him. He avoided Charlie, who tried to reach out, and he was also told by Detective Monroe to avoid the man while the court case was pending. But he just couldn't ignore him. What if Charlie became suspicious, maybe even realized that Moe had begun to talk? Moe put on a face and pretended to be happy about seeing his old buddy. Charlie talked about the sketches he used to do for Moe and even told him about his hit list. Seems like they were friends once again, at least in Charlie's mind. Moe continued to work with Charlie, and knowing that investigators still hadn't found the Dubs' bodies yet, he began to try and ask about them, only to have Charlie draw a literal map for him on the floor in the dirt. Supposedly, the burial site was about 3 miles away from the cabin, up a steep hill. He then confessed how they had killed the family, saying that they had drugged them before strangling them with the cord of a soldering iron. Moe relayed all the info, but it just wasn't enough for investigators who could not find anything after multiple days of searching. Moe was getting desperate at the time, as he had previously testified against a fellow inmate, Daniel Gringus. Moe had snitched, and people knew it, especially at Edmonton Max, where he was soon to be headed. He just knew that if he walked in those doors, Moe would be killed. Luckily, Detective Monroe was able to make some calls at the last minute and prevent the transfer, and even got him placed in the witness protection program because it was becoming more and more apparent that they needed him if they ever wanted to rid themselves of Charles Ng. October 1988. Charlie was still in Canada as the hearing continued. But there seemed to be a growing sentiment among the Canadian citizens that they just wanted Charlie gone, death penalty or no. The families of the victims in California were also growing restless in their wait for justice. Virginia Nestle, the mother of Paul Cosner, tearfully told reporters that she just wanted to talk to Canada's Justice Minister, saying, quote, "I'd like to know if he has any children. Does he have one child he could spare? Because I didn't." End quote. The court was told all about the evidence, about Leonard Lake, about the murders, and Project Miranda. There were over 100 affidavits presented, as well as testimony from 15 witnesses. Their grift was then explained, how they would kill people, sell all their belongings, and then pretended to be them as they cashed their assistance checks until they ran dry. Some of the families of the victims even traveled to Canada to attend the hearing, including Dwight and Lola Stapley, Scott Stapley's parents. Then one of the videotapes was played, and it was obvious that Charlie enjoyed it. He stared at the screen as he watched scenes he had lived through, scenes of Kathy Allen and Brenda O'Connor as they had been forced to disrobe on camera. Charlie was literally drooling over the images. Then finally, it was Moe LeBers' turn on the stand, and the prosecutor thought he was going to be an easy mark to pick apart. He assumed Moe was dumb, just a repeat offender who was too dumb to not get caught, but unbeknownst to the prosecutor, Moe was actually somewhat of a genius. In fact, Moe would eventually become a member of Mensa, a club known for only accepting exceptionally smart people. The prosecution tried to discredit Moe on the stand, tried to make him slip up, but after 4 days, the prosecutor was rather stumped. Moe was smart, articulate, and able to come across as extremely knowledgeable. He was a great witness. He explained what Charlie and Leonard did, why they did it, and in such a way that he never contradicted himself because, as he claimed, he was telling the truth. He even gave details that only someone who had seen the tapes would have known, including how the handcuffs were worn behind their backs, and even how you could hear the cuffs being put on, their loud clicking coming clearly through the audio. Then the kicker. The prosecutor thought he finally had an edge. He was going to prove that Moe was only doing this for selfish reasons and establish that he definitely had a reason to lie about what he was saying. He was sure Moe was getting a deal for his testimony. Moe said he wasn't, and that was the truth. There was no deal, only Moe's hope to look good for the parole board. The prosecutor next tried to claim Moe was in it for a book deal he could make money off of, but Moe told him it might happen, and it might not. Even when the prosecutor called Moe a liar, he remained calm and stated that yes, he had lied in previous cases and under oath, but this was different. The entire thing just seemed to make Moe more believable somehow. Shortly after Moe's testimony, the prosecutor for the case approached the defense with a deal. Charlie would plead guilty and waive extradition if they promised to sentence him to life and not death. The answer was no. The judge came back with a decision on November 29, 1988. Charles Cheetah Ng was ordered to return to the United States to face trial. Canada would not be blocking his extradition, though there was still room for appeals. So, the answer was not no, but it also wasn't yes. It could still be years while the appeal played out in court. The appeal was filed. Almost 3 months later, luckily for everyone else not named Charles Ng, his appeals were denied and he was officially served a warrant for his arrest in order to be extradited to the U.S. Detective Ray Monroe was the man to serve the papers, and he was still heavily involved in the case and had even been working with authorities in California who he was helping to build their case against Charlie. He had also been placed in charge of Moe LaBerge, who was in his protective custody, because of his testimony, not only in Charlie's extradition, but also for snitching on others that he had served time with. But Moe, being Moe, while under the supervision of Detective Monroe, he went to a store to grab some toiletries and, trusting the man, Detective Monroe ran across the street to the bank only to emerge to see Moe being chased by the store's employees. Turns out he had stolen about $20 worth of goods he knew were covered under the terms of his protective custody. He just couldn't help himself. He missed the rush. Moe fully expected Detective Monroe to step in, prevent him from being arrested by local authorities for shoplifting. I mean, he thought they were almost friends with how well they got along, but Detective Monroe just watched, disappointed as Moe was led away. Moe was now looking at loss of his parole, and that meant he'd be in jail for the next 20 years, and Detective Monroe was ready to let him stew in the thought of his dim future. Going back to his own playlist, Moe tried to sell information for leniency. He claimed to have info on another murder, the murder of Joanne Wilson. Detective Monroe just couldn't deal with Moe right now, and despite needing the man for the case against Charles Ng, he left him in jail to think about his life. January 1990. Detective Monroe flew to the U.S. for what felt like the 100th time. He was interviewing 2 of Charlie's former prison mates, including the helicopter pilot Charlie had tried to recruit into his gang, the Brotherhood. He told all about the plans Charlie had, but he also stated that he thought Charlie was crazy and that he hadn't actually been serious about any of it. He had heard from Charlie, though, since they served time together, but the communication was pretty much one way, and all he knew was Charlie was building a bunker or something, and he even sent pictures of it. Next, Detective Monroe was able to interview John Hudson, another man Charlie did time with, and he stated Charlie called him often during the time he was killing people, telling him about the bunker and his goals he was working towards. The case was growing, slowly, but still growing. February 1991, almost 6 years after Charlie had been arrested in Calgary, he was still in Canada. He and his lawyers had been fighting extradition every step of the way, and the process was still ongoing. Protesters marched in front of the Canadian Parliament, while the extradition case was handed all the way up to the Canadian Supreme Court, and their numbers included some of the family members of Charlie's victims. Justice Minister Doug Lewis, who was on Canada's Supreme Court, gave his opinion on the case that had been ongoing for far too long. Quote, "I have concluded that it would be unwise and indeed quite wrong for me to seek to limit the full application of California law to Ng. The method used in California has been in place for a number of years and has found acceptance in the courts in the United States. If it were generally accepted that, by fleeing to Canada, a person accused of capital murder could escape exposure to the death penalty, I think it is foreseeable that Canada would become a safe haven for such criminals. In my view, such a prospect is simply unacceptable." End quote. Finally, in September of 1991, the Supreme Court of Canada voted 4-3 to send Charlie to the U.S. There would be no more appeals. The decision came down at 8 a.m., and in less than an hour, Charlie was already on a plane that was flying to the United States. Several of the guards and officers assigned to him even applauded as the plane's wheels came off of the ground. He was finally somebody else's problem now. The plane touched down in Idaho in order for Charlie to clear customs, but he was not even allowed off the plane. As soon as they were cleared, the plane took off again, this time flying to McClellan Air Force Base near Sacramento, California. Over 100 vehicles were waiting for them when they landed, most of them police cruisers with lights flashing, but there was also occasional media parked there as well. Charlie was then escorted to Folsom Prison, where he was finally booked into the American justice system. His first appearance in an American courthouse was one in San Andreas. Snipers were stationed on nearby rooftops, and the building was surrounded by officers. During his 15-minute appearance, Charlie was arraigned on 11 murder charges. Most of his family was there to witness the event. Charlie was a real peach in prison as he went through pre-trial motions, complaining about anything and everything as loudly as he could. He didn't like the food, he didn't like the clothes, the cell, his lawyers, and he even complained about how he got carsick during the 30-mile ride to the courthouse from Folsom. Charlie, who seemed to be good at buying time, had to stand in front of California's Supreme Court on 8 separate occasions before the trial even began. He was chewing through lawyers, venues, and even judges, going through 10 of them, as well as 4 defense teams, while his trial date kept being pushed further and further away. When asked about the case, Sharon Stiletto, Paul Cosner's sister, would state, quote, "We have no hope at all. It's like trying to hurry a glacier. It's shameful. You know the inscription over the gate to hell, where it says, 'Abandon all hope, ye who enter here'? Well, that about sums it up for me." End quote. Fall 1991. Moe LaBerge had been trying to be good again, and he was almost ready for another shot at parole. He'd been in a day program for a year, working outside of prison during the day before returning every night, and he was even making $800 a month from the job, enough to cover all his expenses. He was still technically in witness protection, but he was ready to leave the prison life behind for good. He met with the board and told them how he now had a degree, told them of his acceptance into the Mensa Club, and that he had a strong family support system waiting for him on the outside. Moe was granted parole. At 39, he was starting over again, and wasting no time, he soon had met a religious woman who he fell in love with, and they even had a child together, though their relationship would only last about 2 years before it fell apart. Moe then got a job as a foreman on a ranch in southern Alberta, where he made a decent wage. He got to do what he loved then, spending most of his days on a horse, and even on his off days he could still be found on a horse as he rode trails with his little boy. He even kept in touch with Detective Monroe, the men having developed a friendship of sorts over their time together when Moe was in protective custody. The Americans still wanted him to testify against Charlie when the case finally went to trial, though they wanted him to first take a lie detector, something he refused to do. He was also afraid that if he agreed to go with them, as soon as they landed and he was on American soil, that he would be detained until he was forced to do whatever they wanted. Detective Monroe tried to reason with Moe, tried to convince him it was all above board, and finally in February 1992, Moe agreed to testify if they still wanted him to. Moe was flown to California and he met with District Attorney John Martin, as well as Deputy Attorney General Charlene Hanaka, and the meeting didn't go well. Moe was hostile, rude, and arrogant. He demanded to testify under an alias, and he was worried that he was only exposing himself by testifying in such a high-profile case. If he had problems, and if he had to relocate, the least they could do is offer him a little protection. There was no deal, so Moe went back to Canada. A few months later, Detective Monroe got a call from Moe, who had landed a job in another ranch near a place called Rocky Mountain House. A year later, he called Detective Monroe again, and this time he told him that he would testify and that he would agree to the polygraph. The test produced mixed results, but it was enough to convince the prosecution that he was serious. March 1995. Prosecutors would eventually move the trial down to Orange County, California, where the chances of Charlie getting the death penalty were going to be the highest. The case was already over 10 years old at this point, and once again, a new defense team was assigned to Charlie, led by William Gorman Kelly, a 48-year-old public defender who had already handled multiple high-profile murder cases. When the files were dropped off at his office, they came in the back of a trailer and consisted of 750 3-inch binders, as well as 3,000 pieces of physical evidence. Quote, "My mouth was hanging open as they were bringing it in. I was still sitting there thinking to myself, what have I done?" End quote. He lost count of the days, showing up to work at 5 a.m. and staying until midnight, taking off the occasional Sunday. He also lost trust in his client, a man who did not want to seem to have anything to do with him. When asked about it by the court, he, Kelly, stated, quote, "Mr. Ng is not speaking to or cooperating with me on any matter. I believe this is a result of psychological problems he is having," end quote. Charlie would only tell the court he believed his lawyer was incompetent. He even was able to get Kelly removed at one point, only to hire him right back again. It was all just confusing. Moe finally arrived back in California, and this time he was fully cooperating. But instead of meeting with the prosecution, Moe LaBerge and Ray Monroe met with Charlie's lawyer, Kelly. The meeting had been sanctioned by the prosecution, who thought it would be a prime opportunity to see what Kelly might try and focus on during trial. Moe turned over all his notes of his and Charlie's conversations, as well as handing over all the sketches that Charlie had made during their incarceration together. Kelly questioned Moe then, asked him questions that he'd most likely have to answer on the stand, though he was keeping something back. He asked him question after question, trying to trip the man up, but with no luck. It was already late in the afternoon when he finally played his trump card. Kelly slid a report across the desk and asked Moe to read it. As soon as Moe saw the medical file, he lost it. Somehow, Kelly had found out Moe's secret. Moe tried to take the folder but was ordered to give it back, but not before threatening Kelly with physical violence. The file was from Moe's past, a past where he had been accused of sexually assaulting a teenage boy, something that he was found completely innocent of. But supposedly he had admitted to it to a psychiatric nurse, but Moe claimed he only admitted to it because it was what the parole board expected from him despite being found innocent in a court of law. Moe stormed out of the building, fuming about the situation. Detective Monroe followed and eventually caught up to Moe, who had seemed to have gotten control of himself, finally. Detective Monroe was glad he had suggested Moe's current wife of 3 years join them on the trip, and he hoped she could talk some sense into Moe, convince him not to act the way he had when it actually came to court, because the file would come up again. Detective Monroe just stared at his friend as Moe began to pretend that he was okay and that he had already forgotten his outburst, though Monroe just didn't know. Moe had been changing lately, had been acting different, and Detective Monroe suspected that he'd been drawn back into the criminal life. He was working for himself again, buying and selling cars, but he also used to joke with Detective Monroe about crimes that he might or might not have information about. He'd also been drinking a lot lately, and Detective Monroe knew Moe liked fast cars, and he often used to mix the two. He was just worried about the man who had slowly become his friend. Maybe this was all just too much for him. July 22nd, 1997. 57-year-old Silver Dollar casino owner Frank Sisson drove his white Dodge Dynasty to his local branch of Calgary Bank. It was 10:30 a.m. when he pulled up to the building, and he was carrying his deposit bag, one loaded with almost $8,000, towards the front doors. But before he could reach the entrance, a white truck skidded into the parking lot before stopping right next to him. A masked man then jumped out of the truck, and Frank was now staring down the barrel of a black handgun. The man demanded the bag, but Frank wasn't having it. Instead of handing it over, he swung at the gunman as he yelled an expletive. He missed, and soon his ears were ringing as multiple shots rang out. Frank's legs buckled. Pain then filled his lower half as he realized he'd been shot multiple times, with each shot striking him below the waist. The shooter then grabbed the deposit bag, jumped in the truck, and burned rubber in his escape. Frank tried to stay calm, even told bystanders who were trying to help him to call his wife, but not to get her into a panic. Someone else called 911. At the hospital, doctors were concerned that they wouldn't be able to save one of his legs, and looking down, Frank simply said, quote, "Shit, that's the same damn leg that got ripped up by the Brahma bull," end quote. The robbery was all over the news, and a few witnesses came forward who said they saw the robber and that they also saw him switch cars shortly after the shots rang out. Officers sent out a bolo for the second vehicle, a Chevy Suburban. Another break in the case came when an off-duty officer saw a man trying to light a Chevy Suburban on fire. He was able to stop the man before the car was ablaze, and when he asked the suspect for his name, he was told it was Moe LaBerge. His wife Jade went to bail him out, and she arrived to find Moe bloody and bruised. He had resisted arrest, quite emphatically, and the officers weren't able to cuff him until he had been knocked unconscious. He tried to tell her there was an explanation, that it was all a misunderstanding, and that he was going to fix everything. You see, it was his brother, Lucien, who'd stolen Moe's Suburban, and then him and a friend of his brother's, a car salesman, had done the robbery, but they had been seen. In order to protect Moe, they had then stolen another Suburban, one that looked just like his, and Moe had stopped them, and that's why he was left holding the gas can. Police were even more skeptical of the story than his wife should have been, and they even began to look at Moe for a few other heists and robberies that had happened recently in the area. Moe looked like he was done for, but he had one last card to play. He told authorities where the gun was and the money in a black Jeep for sale on the car lot where his brother's friend worked. The items were exactly where he said they would be. Problem was, the gun was the wrong caliber and the money couldn't be confirmed to have come from the robbery. The police did their due diligence, however, and watched the Jeep, and sure enough, the salesman went out to look for his stash, only to find that it was gone. The cops then approached the man later to say they were investigating car thefts in the area, and they asked if anything of his was missing, only to get the response that no, everything was okay. They now knew he was involved, but how much? Moe said he'd make the guy talk, that he'd invite him to a restaurant, and he'd even wear a wire. The meeting was arranged, but nothing could be heard on the recording, nothing usable anyways, despite Moe claiming that it was all there. Another sting was set up, and this time they heard what the salesman said. When Moe mentioned seeing Frank Sissons gimping around, the salesman hinted at how they should have killed Sisson instead of just shooting him in the legs. But he never really outright said any of that, only made strange hints, so officers were worried that it was just not going to be enough in court. 7 months then passed while the investigation continued, and one day, Moe called Detective Monroe to tell him that his brother Lucien was ready to talk. Lucien met Detective Monroe then and said he was ready to talk about the robbery, though he was afraid. He then pointed the finger at the car salesman, saying he was the shooter and that it had all been his idea. The salesman was immediately arrested, and soon the trial began. Meanwhile, Charlie's case was still ongoing, and they were trying to get the medical file, the one where Moe supposedly admitted to sexual assault, admitted as evidence to try and paint Moe as an unreliable witness. The prosecution stated that it was a violation of Moe's rights, that not only did that file contain info about him, it also contained information about others in his family. The judge sided with the prosecution, and the defense was not allowed to submit it as evidence. Moe heard the good news on May 19th when he checked his phone after returning from a business trip. Hungry and with no food in the house, he got in his Suburban and made the drive to the nearby town of Crossfield, where he planned on getting dinner. He ate a bowl of soup and a Caesar salad and chatted with the employees at the restaurant that he had chosen. He always ate there when his wife Jade was out of town, and that night was no exception. At around 11 p.m., he finally left after telling everyone good night. According to them, he was in good spirits as he drove away. Police estimated that the Suburban was traveling about 100 miles an hour when he hit the blades of a cultivator, and the impact immediately caused the vehicle to burst into flames. Detective Monroe arrived on scene only a few hours after the crash was reported. He saw the body, barely even recognizable as human, hanging out of the car window. Moe's prized Rolex was discovered in the wreck, as well as about $23,000, the money having been scattered everywhere when his hidden cash box compartment had burst open. There were many questions, things like, had someone killed Moe? Had he killed himself? Was it an accident? Was it really even Moe in the Suburban? A cursory glance at the road showed no skid marks, so it was assumed that they had either been tampered with or they were never applied at all. Over the next few days, more info came out. Moe had checked his life insurance policy just 4 days before the crash and had recently seen his dentist, who was located in Saskatoon, the same town where a hotel had just been robbed. The total stolen was $46,000, making police wonder if the $23,000 they had found had been Moe's half of a two-man job. Later, Detective Monroe spoke at Moe's funeral as a friend rather than a law enforcement official. Quote, Moe had a very cavalier and carefree spirit which made it very easy to like him as a friend. We enjoyed many fun-filled, memorable times together, as well as many tough and trying times throughout difficult periods in both of our lives. End quote. Moe's eldest brother, Roger, also spoke, stating, quote, Moe, you pushed the limit in everything you did, and you thrived on being on the edge. From your early childhood to the very end, your nature was to challenge everything. No matter how exhilarating or dangerous the situation, you always told me to go for it because only the good die young, and what a shame not to have lived a life to the limit. Moe, you lived life to the limit. End quote. About a month after the funeral, Detective Monroe received a call from Lucien, Moe's brother. Lucien then spilled how Moe had talked him into confessing he was a part of the robbery, and how if he just said what he was supposed to, Moe was going to make everything go away. Turns out, Lucien had nothing to do with anything, and that it had actually been Moe and the car salesman the whole time. Lucien reiterated how Moe said nothing bad would happen to him, but now that Moe was gone, he was afraid he was going to jail for something he didn't do. Detective Monroe knew Lucien was telling the truth, and he sent the man away telling him that he would take care of it. Turns out his friend hadn't really changed after all, just like he had suspected. Jury selection finally began for the case against Charles Cheetah Ng on September 14, 1998. In his media interviews, Charlie attempted to appear normal, tried to come off as just an ordinary man, the one who had been manipulated by Leonard Lake. He then claimed it was the media's fault that everyone thought he was a monster because they had portrayed him that way, conveniently forgetting that he often portrayed himself that way. And it was all part of the act, or the defense, that Charlie was just an easily swayed kid, one who was just looking for a father figure, a role picked up by a monster. The trial finally began on October 26, 1998, 13 years, 3 months, and 20 days after Charlie's arrest in Calgary. One of the first pieces of evidence presented in the case was a videotape, one of the tapes found buried on the property where Charlie and Leonard had buried their victims. Charlie was clearly seen on tape, well, a younger version of himself anyways, solidly tying him to the property. His voice was also heard by the jury as he was recorded saying, quote, "You can cry and stuff like the rest of them, but it won't do you no good. We are pretty cold-hearted," end quote. The tape continued and the jury had to watch as a terrified Kathy Allen was coerced into becoming a slave. It was plain to see that the 14 women and 4 men that sat on the jury, including the alternates, were visibly shaken. Kelly tried to continue to paint Charlie as a brainwashed victim, but it just didn't work out that way. And despite no longer being able to have Moe LaBerge take the stand, they still had the drawings he'd kept, drawings that were connected to Charlie. The prosecution was not able to prove he had drawn the sketches, but using handwriting experts, they were able to prove that Charlie had been the one at least to write the captions that accompanied each disgusting illustration. The prosecution also called 60 witnesses over the next 4 weeks, and each described links that tied Charlie to the multiple murders. The defense called over 60 witnesses of their own, at least before Christmas, with 20 more coming after the new year. Finally, the last piece of evidence was shown to the jury, a clip of Charlie literally hacking off the clothing of a terrified Brenda O'Connor. The defense was supposed to begin closing arguments the very next day, but in an unanticipated twist, Charlie moved once again to dismiss his lawyers at the last second. You see, he wanted to testify, but his lawyers weren't calling him to the stand, so as a last-ditch effort to give his spiel, he tried to get his lawyers officially dismissed. The judge, Judge Ryan, refused the motion, but he did allow Charlie the right to speak in his own defense, despite it being against the wishes of his counsel. And, after a brief period where both sides desperately tried to prepare for what was to come, Charlie, wearing a pink shirt, took the stand. He tried to excuse everything, including the drawings, saying they were just crude jokes, sketches he made to pass the time. He claimed that Moe coached him, told him what to draw, and even started some of the drawings himself before asking Charlie to finish them. He thought they were friends, thought it was just a distraction from their boredom, so he played along. On cross-examination, he was grilled and asked multiple times if he ever talked about the crimes for which he was being charged, and he replied, quote, "Oh no, never. I never talked about my..." end quote. He stopped then, not finishing his statement, but later most people would agree that he had almost said, "I never talked about my victims." Finally, on February 7, 1999, the defense rested for a final time. After almost 3.5 months, it was time for the jury to decide Charlie's fate. The jury deliberated for 9 days, and finally, on February 24, 1999, everyone was reconvened to hear their result. But there was an issue. There was one count of all of them that the jury just couldn't come to a conclusion on: Paul Cosner. Charlie was found guilty of every single charge, every single murder he'd been accused of, except for Paul's. The jury just couldn't come to an agreement on that one point, so the judge declared a mistrial for that single count, and the jury returned guilty verdicts on everything else. Paul's sister, the one who had shown up to almost everything, including the hearings in Canada, ran out of the room screaming. She, and she alone, had been denied justice by 2 of the 12-seated jurors. During the ensuing sentencing hearing, a stream of individuals testified on Charlie's behalf, begging the court to not give him the death penalty. Family members, Marine buddies, even prison friends. Finally, Charlie's own father, Kenneth Ng, once again took to the stand at another of his son's trials. During his speech, he took responsibility for his son, saying he might have been too harsh on the boy, might have raised him better, but now, quote, "maybe it's too late," end quote. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning to their homes for the weekend. During that weekend, one of the female jurors got a call from a soft-spoken man with an Asian accent who identified himself as Charles. When asked if she was actually speaking to Charles Ng, she got the reply, quote, "Oh, I am sorry. I just wanted to tell you that you are very nice," end quote. When asked how he got her number, Charlie responded, quote, "I had a friend help me," end quote. She told him she couldn't talk to him before hanging up the phone. The juror immediately called a bailiff who went and checked on Charlie in his holding cell. It was then confirmed that Charlie had indeed been on the phone when the juror received the call. A secret hearing was then held and Charlie was questioned, and the juror was also questioned, but she stated that she could ignore the incident and not let it affect her decision. Quote, "A defendant cannot be allowed to get jurors kicked off of the case during the deliberation process. He can't force a mistrial through his conduct," end quote. Soon after the incident, the jury informed the court that they had reached a decision. Charlie was recommended for the death penalty. As was to be expected, Charlie and his defense filed a seemingly endless stream of motions, all of which were nothing but complaints. Things took too long, things moved too quick, there wasn't enough consideration for this, too much consideration for that, and on and on and on. They even tried to say Charlie was too tired at one point, saying he was kept up all night from fear and didn't get his required 8 hours of sleep that was established by case law. They were told that it's not their fault he stayed up so late and that they had done their part by having him back in his cell with plenty of time to get his 8 hours of rest. Next, Charlie's lawyer, Mr. Kelly, tried to get the judge to block victim impact statements because he claimed they, quote, "didn't have anything to do with anything," end quote. His motion was denied. Charlie had to sit there as the victims' families finally had their day in court almost 15 years later. After the last person had given their speech, the judge finally announced the final decision. Quote, "It is the order of this court that you shall be punished by death, said penalty to be inflicted within the walls of California State Prison at San Quentin in the manner prescribed by law at the time to be fixed by this court in a warrant of execution," end quote. More than 2 decades have passed since Charlie was sentenced to death, but he remains in San Quentin on death row with more than 700 other inmates. And despite being sentenced to death, it appears as if he'll live a long, healthy life before he most likely dies of old age, as his health plan, last time I checked, was much better than my own. Only 13 murderers have been executed by the state of California since 1978, the last one having been the execution of Clarence Ray Allen in 2006. Governor Gavin Newsom declared a moratorium on executions in 2019, and the death chamber has since been dismantled. The victims must continue to wait. It's unknown just how many people Charles Cheetah Ng and Leonard Thomas Lake murdered during their time together. It's unknown just how many disappearances they were responsible for, but what is known is that they did a lot in a relatively short period of time. The pair only seemed to have one care in the world, and that was themselves. They only ever thought about what they could take from the world without ever considering giving back. They took what they wanted, took who they wanted, and when the law finally stood up and began to do their jobs, the two, quote, warriors, end quote, folded almost instantly. One took the easy way out, refusing to stand up and account for his actions, taking the path of a coward. The other blamed everything and everyone else for his own choices, his own actions. They thought they were tough, military men who could take on the world, but the reality was they were more like wet toilet paper falling to pieces over the slightest pushback. They were monsters, but also cowards, men who couldn't even rely on themselves to get what they wanted. Just sad little men who would rather hurt others, kill others, rather than face any amount of rejection. And that is going to be it for part 4 and the conclusion of our tale of the case of Charles Cheetah Ng and Leonard Thomas Lake. Join us next week as we take on a new case, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram at AlmostFictionPod, where I will be adding a whole new facet of content that I'm sure you'll love. I'm also available on Cameo, where you can search for Chase Ellerman, and if you want to buy me a green tea, a beverage vital for my research, then you can do that as well over at coffee.com/Chase Ellerman. That's ko-fi.com/Chase Ellerman. Thank you to everyone so far who has supported, and especially thank you for stocking the fridge for this heavy series. Also remember to follow us on Facebook, And if you don't have social media but you want to stay up to date on all things Almost Fiction, including merch drops, meetups, and more, you can email me at almostfictionpod@gmail.com, where I can add you to the list so you never miss out. Reminder, that's almostfictionpod@gmail.com. If you can't support right now, it's really just as important to rate and review the show so that it shows up higher on any search features. Also, please tell your friends and coworkers, as that's some of the most important work you can do for any creator. Thank you all so much for listening. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.